For centuries, they felt unstoppable. The Ottoman Empire was a relentless force that brought sultans to the gates of Vienna and practically turned the Mediterranean into a Turkish lake. Many were convinced it was their destiny to conquer the entire world. But what if the secret to their downfall wasn't some grand crusade or a massive Christian alliance, but a single, disastrous battle fought in a shroud of fog and terror? The a battle that would expose a fatal crack in their legendary war machine and trigger a slow decline that would haunt the Sultan's dynasty for generations. The unstoppable machine. In the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Empire inspired both awe and fear. Led by the brilliant and utterly ruthless Sultan Mehmed II, history knows him as Mehmed the Conqueror. This was an empire on the move. In 1453, his massive cannons blasted through the thousand-year-old walls of Constantinople, snuffing out the last embers of the Roman Empire and sending a shockwave across all of Europe. This was the Ottoman Golden Age. Their armies were a terrifying mix of new technology and ancient tradition. You had the Janissaries, an elite force of infantry, the most disciplined and feared soldiers on the planet. Their Sipahi cavalry were masters of the devastating charge, and their artillery was second to none. From the Balkans to the Black Sea, Ottoman flags flew over conquered lands. Sultan Mehmed II was a visionary who saw no limits to his empire's power. After taking Constantinople, he turned his gaze to the rest of Europe. His commanders had one grand objective: expansion. It was in this atmosphere of absolute confidence, of a military that seemed unbeatable, that the Sultan ordered his armies north to deal with a troublesome prince. No one in the Ottoman court could have possibly guessed that this routine mission would become one of the most catastrophic defeats in their entire history. The seeds of disaster, the source of the Sultan's problem, was a small principality called Moldavia, tucked away between the Carpathian Mountains and the Black Sea, and its leader was a man who had become a legend, Voivode Stephen III, better known as Stephen the Great. Stephen was a sharp and fiercely independent ruler of a small country surrounded by giants: Hungary, Poland, Lithuania, and the ever-expanding Ottoman Empire. For years, he'd masterfully played them against each other, but his open defiance of the Sultan had finally gone too far. The trouble really started over Wallachia, which the Ottomans considered their turf. Stephen kept intervening, kicking out the Sultan's hand-picked rulers. Finally, he flat-out refused to pay the traditional tribute to the Sultan, a clear declaration of rebellion. For Mehmed the Conqueror, this was an insult he couldn't let stand. He ordered one of his most trusted generals, Hadim Suleiman Pasha, the governor of Rumelia, to gather an army and crush the insolent Moldavian prince for good. Suleiman Pasha pulled together a colossal force. While some sources claimed it was as large as 120,000 men, modern estimates point to a still massive army of over 60,000. These were battle-hardened soldiers, but many were already bone-tired from a long and brutal siege in Albania. Now they had to march, in the dead of winter, deep into hostile lands. Suleiman Pasha, totally confident in his overwhelming numbers, pushed his army on. He had no idea that Stephen the Great wasn't just laying a trap on a battlefield, but across his entire country. The fog of war. As the massive Ottoman army crossed the frozen Danube and marched into Moldavia in the winter of 1474, they found nothing. Stephen had unleashed a brutal, scorched earth policy. Villages were empty, fields torched, and worst of all, the water wells had been poisoned. The Ottomans had expected to live off the land, but now they found themselves in a barren, frozen wasteland. Hunger and sickness began to eat away at their ranks before they'd even seen a single Moldavian soldier. Stephen's smaller army was everywhere and nowhere at once. They launched constant guerrilla attacks, ambushing supply wagons and harassing the Ottoman columns before melting back into the forests. Demoralized, exhausted, and starving, Suleiman Pasha's army trudged on, desperate for a real battle. Finally, Ottoman scouts brought what sounded like good news. They'd found untouched villages near the town of Vaslui. Believing Stephen was finally cornered, Suleiman Pasha aimed his entire force right for them, walking straight into the trap. The battlefield Stephen chose was a marshy, narrow valley near Vaslui, flanked by dense, wooded hills, a place called Podul Inalt, or the High Bridge, where the hopeless wooded hills, flanked by dense wooded hills, a place called Podul Inalt, or the High Bridge. On the morning of January 10th, 1475, a thick, disorienting fog covered everything. The ground had turned into a muddy swamp, making every step a struggle for the heavily armored Ottoman soldiers and their horses. Hidden on the forested slopes, Stephen had placed his cannons, his archers, and the main body of his 40,000-man army. He then sent a small group into the valley to act as bait. Hidden by the fog, Moldavian musicians started playing war drums and horns from all over the woods, making it sound like a massive army was gathering. The Ottomans, who couldn't see more than a few feet in front of them, were completely confused. Thinking they were facing Stephen's main force, the Ottoman vanguard charged forward into the mud and the mist. The breaking point, as the first wave of Ottomans pushed forward, they were hit by a terrifying storm of cannonballs and arrows raining down from the invisible hillsides. The fog was so thick the Ottoman soldiers couldn't even see where the attack was coming from. They were fighting ghosts. Still, they pressed on, their commanders convinced that if they could just smash through the small Moldavian force in the center, they would capture Stephen himself. This was exactly what Stephen wanted. He had intentionally made his center look weak, luring the bulk of the Ottoman army deeper and deeper into the killing zone. The linchpin of his plan was the High Bridge itself, a wooden bridge over the Barlad River that was the only way to cross the marshy terrain. Believing victory was just moments away, a huge force of elite Ottoman Sipahi cavalry charged for it, aiming to shatter the Moldavian line. But the bridge, which the Moldavians had likely weakened beforehand, couldn't take the weight of thousands of armored men and horses. It collapsed. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of the empire's finest cavalrymen were sent plunging into the freezing muddy water, their heavy armor dragging them to their doom. In that exact moment of chaos, with the Ottoman center in shambles and their best cavalry drowning, Stephen gave the signal. From both wooded flanks, the rest of the Moldavian army charged downhill into the valley, their war cries finally revealing their true positions. They slammed into the surprised and disorganized Ottoman flanks. Panic tore through the Ottoman ranks. An army that had felt invincible just hours before was now trapped, blind, and being slaughtered from three sides. Suleiman Pasha tried desperately to rally his men, but the psychological shock was too much. The unstoppable war machine simply broke. The aftermath, the retreat was a nightmare for the Ottomans, lasting 3 long days as Stephen's army chased them all the way back to the Danube. The scale of the defeat was almost unbelievable. Venetian and Polish records claimed the Ottomans lost over 40,000 men, a catastrophic number for any army at the time. Stephen captured hundreds of their battle standards, all of their cannons, and a huge amount of treasure. After the battle, Stephen wrote to the other rulers of Europe to announce his victory. He told them he had cut to pieces the enemy and begged them to join him in a united crusade. Pope Sixtus IV, stunned by the news, gave Stephen the title Athleta Christi, the champion of Christ. A Polish chronicler, Jan Długosz, called Stephen a hero, saying he was the most worthy leader to command a Christian army against the Turks. The victory at Vaslui wasn't just a military win. It was a huge symbolic victory that sent a message across the entire continent. For Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, the news was so devastating that he reportedly shut himself away and refused to see anyone for several days. His grand plans for European expansion were put on hold. His mind was now focused on only one thing: revenge. Generations of haunting, and Mehmed would get his revenge. The very next year, he personally led a massive army of 150,000 men into Moldavia and defeated Stephen at the Battle of Valea Alba. But even then, he couldn't conquer the principality. The Ottomans failed to take Stephen's main fortresses and were eventually forced to retreat again, this time because of plague and running out of supplies. But even with that victory, the damage from Vaslui was done. It couldn't be erased by another battle. The Battle of Vaslui was a deep psychological wound. It shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility. For the first time, it had been proven on a massive scale that the Sultan's armies were not an unstoppable force of nature. They could be beaten, they could be completely wiped out. The battle exposed a shocking weakness. The huge, multicultural Ottoman army, so deadly in open field battles, was incredibly vulnerable to scorched earth tactics, guerrilla warfare, and a clever use of the terrain. A smaller, well-leaded, and highly motivated army could use strategy to beat brute force. This was a lesson that future European commanders and resistance leaders would not forget. While the Battle of Vaslui didn't destroy the Ottoman Empire overnight, it exposed the first major crack in its foundation. It was a warning that the empire's power, as immense as it was not absolute. The fear and confusion that drowned the Ottoman army in that foggy valley would become a haunting memory, a symbol of a vulnerability that would be exploited again and again in the coming centuries, contributing to the long, slow decline of a once unbeatable dynasty. Conclusion: the Ottoman Empire was a titan of the 15th century, an empire that had conquered Constantinople and looked like it was about to swallow Europe whole. But on a cold January day, in a misty valley in Moldavia, that titan stumbled. Through brilliant, ruthless strategy and an unbreakable will to defend his homeland, Stephen the Great proved that even the most powerful war machine can be broken. The Battle of Vaslui is a timeless reminder of how strategic genius and the courage of an underdog can truly change the course of history. What do you think is the most important factor in an underdog victory like this? The leader's genius, the cleverness of the strategy, or the arrogance and mistakes of the powerful? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.